All right. Hello, YouTube. Here we are on Mondays, Goddess Vibrations, a spiritual sexual empowerment show. Tonight, I have Kirti on again. We are going to talk about boundary pushers, how to deal. And this topic is a little bit, I think it's pretty obvious when somebody is overtly pushing your boundaries, but I think what we wanted to talk more about are these really subtle boundary violations that sometimes you don't even notice in the moment until like a half hour later you're processing and you're like, something was messed up about that interaction or this situation, and then you start to put the pieces together. And so how do we, well, probably first start with how do we acknowledge or define that? Maybe we can each give some examples, and then how to deal with it, or how you've dealt with it in your life, Kirti. How I've dealt with it. Not always the best way have I dealt with it.
I don't know. God, let me find some really great ways.
Yeah. Well, and it takes a lot of practice too. In general, this being human thing, but just communication and like really standing in your power and knowing the difference between ourselves and another and where we come together and where we need to be differentiated and all that stuff. I just think it just takes a lot of practice in general. And I know very few people who have mastered that, right? And they're usually in their 60s. So it's a work in progress. So everybody out there who's also dealing with this situation, know that you're not alone.
Right. No, and little by little, I think the first step is to really actually be able to sense when you're feeling that your boundary is that you even had a boundary that got crossed.
Mm-hmm.
That can sometimes be shocking. Sometimes we only are aware of the boundaries that we are told about, whether it be in school or by parents or culture or religion, right? But then there's these other set of boundaries that are our unique set of our authentic self boundaries that sometimes aren't, we don't always wear that out on the open, and we don't always know how to do that. So, boundaries about your sexuality or your sensuality, what you should be willing to do and not do in certain situations. Sometimes, we're schooled that a lot of women think that, well, if he bought me drinks and dinner, that means that I should be willing to like let him touch me or talk to me in a certain way. And for other women, or they might say, fuck that shit, that is ridiculous. For some partnerships it might even be that, like, oh well, if you're a certain gender, then you should be totally open to all of these sexual, what we have decided are the sexual acts for, gay men, and like you should only always be doing that. And then for, gay women, like this is it. Oh, and if you're bisexual, this is what's allowed. Like we've constantly got all of these kind of programming around what is acceptable and not, right? So that's a big thing for me. What about for you?
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, I just remembered the story of when I was in New York City a few years back. I met this man, this lovely gentleman, like on the fly, and he invited me out for champagne and on the, to the rooftop bar or whatever to look at the Empire State Building. And I was like, no, 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 I just had gotten into town and got off the subway and I had to get to my friend's house, but then my friend canceled, so I literally had nowhere to go. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to have champagne with you. Well, it turned into dinner, and he invited another goddess friend of mine to join us for dinner, because I think he figured that was the only way I was probably going to stay for dinner, and had a really nice night. But as the night went on and he started having more drinks, he started to get kind of handsy, right? And so me at that time in particular, I was really clear about standing in my power and giving no fucks about it. So I was just like, okay, you're getting a little handsy. Like I just said it, I like even raised my voice a little bit, not angrily, but just in a lighthearted way. Okay, keep the hands off. I told you, that sort of thing. And then by the end of the night, I think we had stopped in to tell my host that I was plans had changed and I was out. And then he actually had a date too. So it worked out well, but planned to meet back at his place at a certain time. And so we get back to my friend's house where I was staying for that night, and I ring the buzzer, and I knew this man who had taken me out. He had bought me champagne. He had thrown money to the door guys to get us up on the rooftop. He threw money to hold my luggage while we were there. Like he was just throwing money all night. But for me, I was like, I didn't ask him to do that. I declined politely twice, but he kept,
Mm-hmm.
trying and trying. And then until finally I'm like, okay, what's the harm? He seems harmless. And I knew he was going to try to kiss me because he had already been sort of handsy, but I was sure that I did not want to kiss from him because even though I enjoyed his company, I had no romantic feelings and he was already crossing boundaries throughout the night. And so I knew that when the door opened, I had to be like, oh, hurry up, I gotta go. So I just went, he leaned in, I gave him a cheek real quick. I'm like, you're the best. And then like ran up the stairs. So luckily I had a locked door to help me with that, because in that moment, it was just the two of us. And those situations are very common, I think. And I was processing it with my friend, and he's like, wow, he spent all that money on you. This is a guy, he spent all that money on you and you didn't even kiss him. And I was like, why would I? I didn't want to. There's no reason. But in our culture, right, we think, or men think, that if we spend a lot of money, it's kind of greasing the wheel or whatever else, or they're hoping that there's going to be some kind of obligation or some kind of transactional, affection. But it's what I was sure about in that moment, and what I like to remind other women about, is that you only need to kiss them if you feel like kissing them, or if you don't want to kiss them, there's no reason. But it's I think especially in women of our generation, yours and mine, where we're Gen Xers and in that age, it was very common to, oh, be nice and give him a kiss, or do
Right.
this or do that.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking to that, the guy dishing out the money, he needed some boundaries
Right.
for himself.
Oh yeah, he
Like
also
if I'm
invited me
not,
for
if
a
I
weekend
do,
away too. Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
he did.
yeah, it's kind of, it goes both ways. It's like, hey, like you don't have to do anything to get affection. Like you don't have to
Hmm.
use your money to get affection from a woman. Like
Hmm.
it doesn't really take all that much, really,
Hmm.
to
Yeah,
get a
right.
woman's attention.
Yeah, it is. It's about attraction. And like I said, I had a lovely evening. I had a lovely time. I don't know if he woke up with regret about like dropping all that money. And I
Mhm.
mean, but I think he had a lovely time too. We had, great conversation and everything else. So it's not like, oh, he didn't get anything of it. We start to think about our worth as like what we do sexually, which is wrong.
Oh, yeah, I just was talking about that. It's like I think that as adults, we make it all about sex and the genitals to
Hmm.
have fun and play because we've actually forgotten how to play like a
Hmm.
child, like
Hmm.
the genitals are never a freaking thing, hopefully, right? They're in the most positive childhood setting. It's like the
Hmm.
genitals, it's like, yeah, whatever. It's like they're these things that we just like got as a part of our body. Like, oh yeah, there's that thing down there, and it's like it's like almost like a plaything and just
Hmm.
see what you feel.
Children's
It's
toy.
exploratory. Yeah. It's like exploratory. And then
Hmm.
as we get older, we only know how to play like that. And we forget that there's all
Hmm.
these other ways to play.
Hmm.
And that's when we need to create the boundaries about like, in actually creating a boundary. And it's, some folks are like, oh, like, God, you have so many no's. And it's like, well, these no's are actually yeses.
To you.
Yeah, they're yeses to me. Like if I do, and I feel that if you allow this yes for me, it's actually going to eventually be a yes for you.
Hmm.
However, like let's honor the yeses that we have for ourselves,
Hmm.
and that's really, really a huge, huge rule for me. Is like, is this boundary that I'm setting? Is it honoring myself, and then also how am I going to continuously like show up for myself so that it's active and it's not like I'm just saying one thing and doing another, because now I'm just showing up for my inner child the way that quote unquote the perpetrators in my childhood showed up, right? I want to do the different, I want to do something different for my inner child wound.
Right.
I want to be the adult that I would have loved showed up for me, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that the boundary pushers, there's that dynamic. Then there's the boundary pushers of work, like the work setting. Like
Yeah,
talk
that
about
are platonic. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, like what about like your boss or your colleagues, like the work environment boundaries? Do you have any experiences with those?
Yeah, lots. I mean, I worked for the public school system for years. But I mean, part of it was like kids too, because I was working mainly with teenagers, and
Mm,
teenagers are like expert button pushers and boundary crossers and all of that. So I just think of even like in my clients working with mostly teenage boys in a day treatment facility, one of the things was like side hug. They always want to come up and give you a hug and feel your boobies. And that's great for like a 4-year-old boy, but like a teenage boy, like, okay, nobody needs that many hugs during the school day. So it's like side hug, that's like a boundary. Like, and I feel like sometimes when it's hard to verbally enforce a boundary, like you said, you have to be clear on it first so that you can be one step ahead and
Mm.
beat them to crossing that, because you're already expecting or anticipating that some folks might cross that boundary. So then you're like, no, here, so that they can't, and you set it. So there's been that, and then there's been yeah, just things with colleagues and coworkers. Nothing specific is really coming up for me right now. That seems like such a long time ago. Now
I know,
this is
right?
who I work with. So I
So
generally have pretty good experiences.
I would say with the contracts that I run with homeschooling, one of the boundaries is just like sticking to my time that I put in, because like that if you really wanted to, you could totally put in overtime because you just love the work you do or you're so committed to it. But a lot of times I feel like in education they bank off that, or off service, any kind
Hmm.
of service industry, probably in hospitals, nurses and doctors deal with that as well,
For sure.
and mental health practitioners as well, where it's like, it's this call that's like you're really emotionally present and there and you're helping somebody's healing, that
Hmm.
it's you got to also hold the boundary of, okay, well, how much can I serve in order to maintain my well-being, the well of my being. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And now that you say that, I think that probably has been the biggest boundary cross. Like, can you stay late for free, of course, because you work on salary? Can
Right.
you, do this, especially during like audit times? Can you work extra time, or you're not allowed to leave until, now, or even though showed up early, these sorts of things. Yeah, those asks that can, again, I mentioned some of the subtle boundary crossing, and when you do that every once in a while, it's totally healthy. But because sometimes people are in need, and it's like, okay, we got to all come together as a team and do this. But if you're consistently having those asks for people without some sort of doing something in return for them, it's really not respecting. It's kind of like you're squeezing everything you can out of someone
Right.
without any concern for their self-care and their well-being. And again, it's not even a transactional thing. It's just like honoring another person's need to rest and recharge and take care of themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if that wasn't a symptom of this nation, we probably wouldn't have as many unions as we do
Mm,
in these government
hmm.
agencies. I mean, they kind of bank off of people's labor and them going above and beyond. I mean, I think that that's why a lot of the schools and companies have unions, because
Hmm.
the boundaries have been crossed so much, and it's to the point where people's livelihood is kind of being abused and their well-being is being abused. So I
Yes.
think that it's definitely a symptom. Like, if we were to apply that to the chakra system, that would definitely be a root issue of, like, it's in the soil of this country. Because if you look at the history of this concern, it goes it goes back to when we first inhabited and came to this country in the first place. Well,
Hmm.
we crossed some fucking boundaries,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
didn't
It's
we?
mine. Take it. Yeah. Exactly. That's what happens.
It wasn't like we came and said, "Wow, this is a beautiful place. Like, how can we get it together to get together? And how do we coexist?" It's like there's a part of the human quality of the colonizers that was boundary pushing, and it's a
Mhm.
symptom of our work to this day, of our social
Right.
economy to this day.
Yeah. For sure. And I just have something I want to say about that too. But I wanted to let everybody watching, because there's some folks watching, that I can see the comment box. I did a split screen so that I can see your
Ooh,
comments if you want
you
to type them in.
fancy.
It just means that it looks like I'm looking off to the side now, because my
I
my
figured.
Zoom is on the left and I don't know how to recenter it. I don't know. It's so crazy how this computer seems to change every time. But on the topic of colonizers and coming into, crossing boundaries, I think I mentioned her in the show before. Her name is April Hardy or Hartley. She's a anti-racism
Mm.
educator, worker. She's a social worker. So that's why I love her work, because it's trauma informed. And she talks about how all racism is narcissism. And so, it's like coming and saying, well, that's mine because I'm here and I'm bigger or stronger than you, or I have a gun and you only have an arrow, or whatever the thing is. It's like, just, survival of the fittest or whatever. It's narcissism really at the root of it. It's not saying that that means you have narcissistic personality disorder, but there's a spectrum of narcissism that
Mm,
lies on. And I think in those moments where I feel like my boundaries are subtly being pushed, it is somebody that has high narcissism or
mm.
higher narcissism, because they are not considering what it might feel like to be on the other side of their actions. They're just really focused on what they want and going for it. And that is glorified, especially in our American culture, right? And so where is that healthy and needed and necessary? We think of like the Nike Just Do It ads or whatever. And when is that just really toxic and getting in the way of the sustainability and long-term relationship or life of whatever, a country, a government, a romantic relationship, a friendship, those sorts of things. And so that's what it is. And somebody who has high narcissism, they might not care as much about their friendships because they see people as replaceable. So if they burn out this person, then there's another person that'll come in. So that might not even be enough of a consequence to change. But I think that more often than not, it's just that people aren't taught good boundaries.
Yeah.
They're not taught. And I also know from working in the therapeutic space that a lot of in homes where there's sexual abuse or there's incest, there's a lot of like doors aren't closed and things are out in the open, and those sorts of like boundaries, like just small, very subtle boundaries that are innocent, often aren't respected. Walking into somebody's room without knocking, those sorts of things, in big families or whatever else. Or, sometimes there's a necessity to share bathrooms and whatever else, but then how do we still be respectful of boundaries in those circumstances?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, growing up in an Indian family,
Mm.
the idea of boundaries is just like hilarious because it's a freaking overpopulated country.
Right.
My mom would just clown me and be like, "You need your space. Oh, your space." I learned that in school. Like, like I would close my door and be like, "I need privacy." She'd be like, "Privacy?
Mm-hmm.
I gotta leave this door open." Like,
Mm-hmm.
that is not. It was like we did
Yeah.
not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And my mother felt like it was closing, just closing yourself off, and that felt very offensive to her, right? Um,
Yeah.
and I can also see though, like that it's yeah, because in India, it's my mom was even, even when I'm there and I hear stories, it's just like even to find a place to tuck away for romance is pretty
Mm-hmm.
difficult, and then it's like to even tuck away and find that place and like hope that like 10 other people don't see you on the way to that and like relay that information back to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So that it in that sense, I'm just like, gosh, that sounds like a lot of repression and
Mm.
you're moving around in fear, right?
Mm.
But then there's also the boundary of like not choosing not to go to certain places because it doesn't feel like it would be safe.
Mm.
And being in an overpopulated country, there's other boundaries that are in place, but I think a lot of times boundaries and physical boundaries get crossed in that way, and then it creates a culture
Mm.
of crossing boundaries and like it's
Mm.
okay to be have your breast get brushed against. I remember in living in New York City, sometimes I'd be like, yeah, no, that someone walks by and grazes parts of your body, and you want to really believe, you know,
Mhm.
that that's what it is, but you truly have to sometimes own that physical space and hold this energetic bubble
Mm.
of a boundary because it's like your field is just open and porous. And I think for a lot of us, we have open porous fields. I know you've totally talked to me about my energetic field too. It's like
Mhm.
it can call in a lot, but yet sometimes it's like I'm not even aware until afterwards. When we,
Yeah.
we talk to each other and you're like, wow, like this was happening and that was happening, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I was so in the moment,
Yeah.
um, and was on this level of feeling
Mhm.
that I couldn't see it, but I did sense like is something
Mm.
off here. But this is the thing. I think for me, it's because I've really experienced a lot of gaslighting.
Mm.
When I feel like something might be off, I always second judge myself.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that's been my issues in creating boundaries because I'm so used to just like believing what somebody tells me
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
not trusting my own truth, even if I ask clarifying questions. But if they're like, no, no, really, I'm not going to do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I trust you.
Yeah. Well, and you have some Libra in your chart too. I think you have you're on the cusp of Libra, and then
Yeah.
you have, I know, I think your Aries rising, right? And then what is your north and south node? I thought that was,
My north node is Virgo, like my son's
oh, okay.
sign,
Oh, okay.
and Libra moon.
Oh, Libra moon. That's where it is. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I've Libra rising. So I think in those moments where I've seen that like your energy field be porous, it's because you're sort of in a not an altered state per se, but just like a very like a bliss state. And then people just your energy is so strong and so magnetic that people just like flock right in. Then I'm like, hey, and I know in those moments I always feel like I want to protect you because I resonate with that too, because I can do that. I can be like, wait, where did all these people come from? Or where did all this come from? Get out of here, kind of thing, like not even noticing how they kind of like snuck in. And most times it was good, well-meaning people that are just
Right.
liking the shiny light, but they don't know what it is, and they're kind of like mucking it up a little bit because they don't know what it is or know how to respect it. And even what you're talking about with like crowded places, New York City, or even in your home being Indian and all of this stuff, there are some brushes to the breast that are completely innocent, like accidental. And then it's like when you have places like that, it's an easy opportunity for somebody with bad intentions to abuse, right? Or in
Mm,
those little things. And that's how it is sometimes in these households that incestual households that don't have as many boundaries. It just makes it easier to abuse a child. So it's not saying that if you have looser boundaries in a home, abuse is going to happen. It just kind of sets the stage for it to be
yeah.
easier once that agent is identified. And then, there's the people that will, use that to their advantage and try to tell you, well, the no
Oh,
is
yeah.
totally innocent, but we always know, we know in our gut when somebody's
Totally.
off, a little
Totally.
bit off.
Totally. And I mean, I can see how my sister has had issues with boundaries and with people
Mm-hmm.
because that's how we were raised. And I see how my whole family really just because of the work environment of running a business together in a family business. It's like you have no boundaries around work and hours. It's like you're putting in to survive as a family and to make an income and just support your family. So there was no boundaries around my work either. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why in jobs I really excelled because I was that person that would do whatever it took to like
Mm-hmm.
get that success and know what the goal is and work towards that goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up, with adrenal fatigue and hypothyroid. So I don't recommend that to anybody.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that to anyone. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah,
no.
it's not worth it. Really, at the end of the day, like you're doing it again. It's like this boundary piece is really directly related to seeking approval.
Yeah. And I think seeking approval. And I also think when you are a big energy, you have a lot more life force. You Kundalini, whatever you want to talk
Mhm.
about, however you want to call it, you have a lot of vital energy. So you can go further than maybe the average bear. And probably the seeking approval. And, I'm speaking from personal experience as well. And I remember being at the school district one day, right before I resigned, I was like, how did I end up with like 45 clients when there's only 40 hours in a week and I still have paperwork and meetings and IEPs? And I'm like, oh, because I don't complain. This is crazy, but it's like, oh, just give it to her, give it to her. She could do it, she could do it. And I like a challenge. And then I realized, wait a minute, just because I can do this doesn't mean that it's good for me. And
Right.
so in my adult life, that has been a big distinction. Yes, I can tolerate this. Is this bothering me, annoying me? Yes, but whatever. Especially when you grow up in a big family, you're used to being annoyed and provoked most of the time. But wait a minute, like I can choose my reality. I can choose,
Right.
to remove that irritation,
Yes.
or I don't prefer this, so I could say something. And then there's those people too that, they have really good boundaries, but they're so harsh with them or they're so strict with them that they end up lonely sometimes too. They don't, it's very, so what I'm saying is like an art. It's really a delicate art and
It's an
skill.
art to be moment to moment with it and
Yes.
and trust that just because you set a boundary here doesn't mean the boundary also has to be here. It's about this moment and this interaction.
Hmm.
Brings me to like boundaries around like which I think that we've been seeing a lot in the community, right? We keep talking about, oh my God, another spiritual Usually they're men. Another
Mhm.
spiritual man has been called out by multiple women in the spiritual community that pushing boundaries, doing too much,
Mhm.
assuming. So, I mean, there's this whole concept of the spiritual guru,
Mhm.
and I'm really speaking to the men embodying masculine, toxic masculine, I would even say.
Mhm.
And that's a difficult one, right? Because most of us who are going to spirituality are going there for healing.
Mhm.
And it's this whole concept of like, well, I'm so thankful to you. And because you've given me these things, like, what are you willing to accept?
Mhm.
And believe it or not, this type of abusive, manipulative relationship happens in many classrooms as well,
Yeah.
where teachers that really are not probably with the best intention or really still love teaching as much as maybe when they first started. It's like they really execute manipulative control in the classroom instead of like an integrative, creative atmosphere. And
Mhm.
a lot of students, I mean, you're literally training our future citizens of this country to literally sit and believe and accept everything that an adult is telling them to be as truth,
Mhm.
and that you're going to be tested on it, and you better be able to regurgitate that information. And if you're really good at regurgitating that information, you get an A.
Mhm.
And that really rewards that you didn't question, and that you didn't disagree, and maybe you didn't answer things differently. That's why I really love homeschooling and project-based learning, because it really forces teachers to break out of that old traditional factory model of education. But I'm seeing that as well in the spiritual community. It's like
Mhm.
in the United States, we just can't get away from that shit. We got
Yeah.
to create a whole every time we have anything that's like collective, it's like, oh, there has to be a leader, and then
Mhm.
there to be a system, and then once we do that, there's a teacher, there's a student, and now there's power.
Well, and
Power.
we love that hero too, that person to look up to. Like my son, he's 10, right? So he's into action movies all day, every day. There's explosions, bombs, weapons, somersaults, like flips through the air. And I'm like, what is going on? So I asked my partner, Rich, I'm like, Rich, tell me what is going on in the mind of this 10-year-old boy right now, or 10-year-old boys that cannot get enough action movies. And he said, well, you look, so with this particular movie was Arthur,
Mm,
Arthur. And he's like, well, the main character, he's this hero, and he's this blonde hair, blue-eyed man, and some boys identify as like them, that's them, they're the hero, they're always the hero in the story, and they fight
mm,
off all these demons and bad guys, and it's just like, they kind of like build their concept or their self-worth or their self-confidence through seeing themselves in this hero. And I was like, oh, okay, now I could see maybe what the draw is. But
right.
again, it's sort of that programming that you have to look a certain way or be a certain way or have a certain skin tone, and then you can be the hero and fight off all these demons and bad guys, and then all these other people will be your like supporters or helpers, but you're the main guy. And we just love those hierarchies in this culture.
Mhm.
It's just it's
Well,
the
it takes us off the hook. It takes us off the hook of functioning off of our own inner wisdom and having to do the inner work of, what truly resonates with us. And if what resonates with us is to upset the setup,
Mhm.
that we have not grown in a society that actually celebrates when people upset the setup. Actually, when people
Mhm.
upset the setup, they get arrested. And if
Mhm.
you're a person of color, you best believe you're thinking about a lot of other things about upsetting the setup, right?
Arrested and potentially losing your life. Yeah.
Serious. It's like the darker your skin tone and the closer you are to Africa and being a man, it's like just it just gets tougher and tougher.
Mhm.
So I think that, this boundary pushing concept for me, it's like a deep one, because when I even see it in my community of friends, I trip on it, because I'm like, we're all doing the spiritual work, but yet you
Mhm.
see it. You see
Mhm.
it all the time.
Mhm.
And I have girlfriends who feel like, oh man, like I'm not comfortable with him touching my arm, but he's my friend. I'm
Oh
not,
gosh,
I'm
yeah.
not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with, you know, um, going over to his house, but like we're friends.
Mhm.
So why shouldn't I? And then when you're there, you're feeling uncomfortable the whole time, and you're not really expressing that the way it was communicated, or it
Yeah.
didn't feel sexy. It didn't feel like a
Yeah.
natural turn on for you. And I think that that's a big sign when your boundaries getting pushed
Yeah.
it should feel like a turn on. And I mean, I
Mm.
even with like I love to just I love to use sexual terms in non-sexual ways because I really want us as a planet to get that like that is the spark of kundalini. We've
Mhm.
just made as adults, again, we make it about sex because that's all only way we can relate. But
Mhm.
even like with my mother, if she wants me to come over for dinner like 5 times a day or 5 times a week, and like I also have all these other things going on, like I gotta let her know, like, that doesn't really turn me on.
Right.
Actually, it's causing me anxiety and stress.
Mhm.
You feel like somebody's request is
Mhm.
not like a natural yes right away. That's
Mhm.
a really good sign to just pause.
Mhm.
And if somebody already does something and it strikes you as awkward,
Mhm.
I think that that's like if you're processing it, and like you said, like even like a day later, I really want to get because I think you're really good at this. So this is also why I was like, I think it's a great topic.
Mhm.
I would like to learn from you, like
Mhm.
the languaging also. So like anytime you feel off, so like sometimes you process it in the moment. You're like, this feels weird, but you're in somebody's home
Mhm.
or you're in front of people, and you're like, I don't want to make a ruckus, right?
Mhm.
And we have that fear of using our voice in that way, or you process it a day later and you're like, actually that was not cool, I'm not interested. So now that we know that this is the root cause, that's in our root and it's
Mhm.
affecting our purpose on this planet now,
That's
because
what puts you down. Puts down your
what
life.
how do we like the communication piece, like
Mhm.
communicating with love and compassion. So I've seen both sides, right? I've
Mhm.
had friends who just like cut like a butcher knife, just go in there and be like, yo, you know what, no, fuck that,
Mhm.
fucked up. I'm not appreciating it. You know the signs, like da 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 da. Like we've been through this. I'm done. It's over. Done. But I've
Mhm.
also, and I feel like I've been there. That's totally been my MO before. I've even
Mhm.
got physical with some men before, and with my mother or my family, and even at work, I have stuffed down my voice so much that I've actually raised my voice,
Mm. Yeah.
so unprofessional, and I've gotten emotional because I'm feeling so stunted, right?
Mhm.
That it's like I just have to volcano mouth. Yes, it's very toxic masculine, but that toxic masculine wound has come from my feminine expression just being stuffed down so far,
Yeah.
right? Now I'm trying to
You know,
move
swing
towards
way over to the other side. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I'm like trying to move towards this like creating boundaries with love and compassion before writing them off.
Mhm.
So like how do you do that?
Well, I think you're actually a lot better at it than you give yourself credit for, to be honest,
Oh,
because
good to hear.
when you communicate, you really do it so compassionately, like so lovingly and so compassionately. So I think that that definitely is, it's sort of like the medicine. Anybody can swallow the medicine after that, because it's packaged with so much love. And I think that's the way to do it right. But then also be very clear. And I know for me, I'm just direct. And sometimes people don't like it, particularly men don't like it because they're not used to being spoken to directly by a woman. I think they expect it
Mm,
to be a little more soft or kind of like coded a little bit. But I just tell them, hey, I'm practicing speaking like a guy. Like, how's it working? Like, and then they're
mm,
like, oh, okay, Bob would say that the same way. Yeah, I see what you're saying, because I want Bob's job too, like, and I want to be able to have what they have. But there's times where, you can bring in your nurturing too. But I think, saying, I think probably borrowing a little bit from your approach and borrowing a little bit from my approach, if we could put them together,
yes.
coming with some love, but then also being very direct and not confusing about what it is. And I think it's always when you say the I feel statements, or I feel, you know, um, uncomfortable when you touch my arm. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't feel good. So stop, or whatever. But, or, you don't even have to tell anybody what to do. You just tell them how you're feeling, and then they get to decide. It's good practice for them too in relating with another human. So
Right.
the worst thing to do is to keep your mouth shut. But I did that for so many years as a young person, and just sat through so many uncomfortable situations of all types, because I didn't want to rock the boat. And you're absolutely right. That was programmed into me through school, through like family, and just like, sit there and don't say anything and don't talk back and all these things. And so I had to like rework that. And now in my 40s, I'm like, more so like it just comes shooting out before I take time to reflect on it sometimes, because I don't want to, I'm done like tolerating little things like that. But I think to not say anything at all, then you're ruminating, because it's going around, you're second guessing. Like you said, if you've already been a victim of gaslighting, you're going to second guess yourself, or third guess, or fourth guess, or fifth guess yourself, because people have like messed with your sense of intuition before, your sense of reality. And then you can build resentment against that person, or, things can happen. But then the other thing is, if it's something very subtle and you come off like really direct and be like, I don't like this, then they're going to be like, what's your issue? Or that might cause some tension or some friction.
Right.
But I think, there's very pleasant ways to say things, but also the sooner the better, as soon as you notice it. But my biggest thing is, like you said, I might not notice it until the next day. And I'm like, what was it that didn't feel right? And I think that's very common for women. And my theory is, because looking at the brain science, the masculine brain, whether it's from a man or a lesbian or whoever, non-binary, but if you have a more masculine brain, it tends to be more analytical. And so when you're solving a problem, for instance, it's only going to light up in that one area, which is like the problem solving. And then now you're thinking about sex, now the sex part is lighting up, which means that sometimes I think for men, that they might not be as aware as women of the subtleties around them, unless they're training their brain to be aware of that, or just to follow her lead, perhaps might be even safer bet, because he's just thinking sex, 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 and he's not noticing all these other things. Whereas when women are turned on and they're involved in a sexual interaction, it's like multiple parts of their brain are lighting up, and it's a more multidimensional sensory system. And the research shows too that women can orgasm much easier. Some men can do it, but I didn't even know this, that most men can't, that from imagery alone.
Wow.
Imagine something and orgasm from that, whereas it's very difficult for men to do that without some physical touch as well. So, but that's because of what's going on in our brain wiring. So the more feminine brain, I think, is we call it women's intuition, but it's picking up on those little temperature changes in the room, like this happened, or he moved that way, or this, all of a sudden you could feel his energy a little bit different, and it doesn't make any sense. It just feels off.
Right.
And then we're like, what is that? And then, it takes us a little while to process and like run it through the computer, which might be the next day. And then we're like, I've got it. Whereas the man is not even aware of it at all, because he's just in his, whatever section of the brain that he's in. So I think that, especially when we're talking about maybe these Me Too situations where it can be a little subtle violation, I think it's a common scenario actually, where both men and women are confused, because she knows that she doesn't want his advances most times because he didn't give her time to want them. So she might actually be attracted to him and be excited, and maybe they had a great date, but now he's rushing things, and he's like putting a kiss on her, and he kind of has like gross breath, and now she's like, I don't think I want another one, whereas if he just took the time to slow down, or let her like kind of come onto him, or slip him some gum or something like that, maybe it would be different. But what's happening, kind of like what you were saying before, is then you don't give her a chance to actually desire you. You're just, here's the next move, here's the next move. And so she's kind of like complying and just being like, all of a sudden we're at step 5, and it's like, whoa, I can't even process.
Right.
Like, I'm still at 2, trying to, savor in that deliciousness. And so when we rush through even those sexual interactions, I think it's confusing to the nervous system. And then the next day, it's not rape, but sometimes it feels a little bit like a consent violation, because she never had the right to choose. It was just like, here it is. And then she's like, oh, okay, and went along with it. And she didn't even know it was a no. She was just kind of like trying to feel it out. So, and then men don't understand that, because he's like, I'm turned on. She didn't say no. She didn't push me off. Like, she just seemed like she was into it. She was turned on. Like, her pussy was wet, like whatever else. And then that's when we start getting into these kind of.
Right. So it's like, it's interesting. It keeps going back to like in childhood, like understanding how, like what feels right and feels wrong, and then worrying about rocking the boat.
Yep.
So you don't say anything, you don't
Hmm.
express your voice, you don't express what's happening. And the
Hmm.
truth is, like, if we do the work to actually, as adults, integrate this piece of us where it's like, okay, this is what feels comfortable for me. And now speaking that and working, like, also realizing, like, if you're dealing with a man or another woman, that, like, you've actually created this boundary crossing for a reason.
Hmm.
This boundary crosser, boundary pusher has
Hmm.
entered you actually created this boundary pusher. It doesn't matter, man, woman, parent, boss, whatever,
Hmm.
even neighbor, does not matter. You've created this boundary crosser for a reason, to learn
Hmm.
something,
Yeah.
that there is something here to heal, and it's
Yeah.
actually preparing you,
Hmm.
because there's that probably another wave coming, that
Yeah.
you need to, like, build the strength of using your voice and
Yeah.
expressing yourself, and
Yeah.
yeah, go for it.
Well, I think it happens. I think, in my humble opinion of only being on the planet so many years, but I think the way that sometimes it happens is that, um, like you said, you draw this energy in so that you can learn a lesson that you're going to need to have in a big way, and when the stakes are higher, more in the future. But also, like, if you're not so good at that area, it's a pattern that's been, and so the compliment comes in, and it'll keep coming in until you figure it out. And this is what I see all the time with narcissistic relationships. It's like people have the main narcissist, some will marry a second narcissist. Sometimes the second one's even worse, but they just presented differently. And then they won't, and then the next few partners won't be full-blown narcissists, but they'll have high narcissism. And so it's still like the pattern kind of fades and fades and fades until you get better and better and better with choosing
Ah,
yourself and your boundaries, right? But sometimes you'll get lucky, and then you'll get this lovely partner, and you can kind of do the healing through that corrective experience too. So I kind of feel like, yeah, you call it in, but then there's always going to be the people that are really in their woundedness, at the time, which is a natural stage of healing. They're like, I didn't do this. This is not my fault. And they also need to know, yeah, their behavior is not your fault. Like, maybe you called in this situation, but their behavior is not your fault. Today, Rich and I were watching it wasn't Animal Planet, but it was like some documentary like that. It was talking about nature, and they had the jungle, the desert, the pond. It was really fascinating to watch biology, and you see the ecosystem, how diverse it is, and all the different players and how they all relate. Like this one, the snake eats the bird's eggs for breakfast, and then she's going to like some more, and the cycle of life. And there was this one, I think it was a caterpillar, that could actually puff up its tail, the end of its tail, and look just like a cobra. It would, like, could mimic a cobra in the jungle. And you think about how adaptive a system is to these different, survival systems, or to ward off someone or whatever. So that caterpillar didn't start off looking like a snake, but whatever the predator was for the caterpillar is going to be intimidated by the snake. So it's like we then start to learn how to puff up to look like a
right.
cobra or whatever. That's kind of what we're doing when these people, these predators, are coming into our space. We're just like adapting a little bit each time. We're evolving so that, we'll be able to really stand in our power. And then sometimes we backslide too.
Right.
And then we're like, oh, that didn't feel good. You backslid when it doesn't feel good. And you're
Right.
like, oh.
Yeah, and I feel like for me, I have a rule of three, like,
Mm.
because I'm learning to trust myself more, with the gaslighting piece.
Hmm.
And so I have a rule of three. I've always had this when I was a kid, but now I understand, like, how I can use it even better. But it's like, if I have a red flag and I'm not able to pick up on it, and it happens one time, right? I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, that felt weird, but I'm not. It's like when I'm cooking, I'm like, it tastes a little bit off, but I'm not sure yet, and I know this is a good person. Like, there's something that I'm feeling about the person, because that's the other piece, this boundary pushing element, right? Like, if we really cut off somebody for it, right? As a collective consciousness, like we started the session with, is we this country started from boundary pushing
Hmm.
and boundary crossing. So it's in our freaking food, it's in our soil,
Everywhere.
it's everywhere, and we are, that is in that is in the field. It's the biofield, definitely, of this country, and I'm probably pretty sure on the planet, right?
Right.
So in that sense, it's like I feel it, and I'm trying to work through it, and so I'm like, okay, it takes a little off, something's off, but it's one part of this person. There's
Hmm.
all these other amazing dynamic parts of them, right? So I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, so then two times, I get a little bit clearer. Third time, I'm like, I gotta fucking say something. Like
Yeah.
at this
Yeah.
point, and so for me, the rule of three is like, but as I'm stepping up to that three, I keep an outskirts. It's like
Hmm.
out, you're on like external area of my biofield because I
Yeah.
don't
Gotta
really
stay
know how to
focused.
completely integrate you. And until that three, if I'm feeling one and two, you're already kind of, I'm creating some space. It can
Hmm.
be physical space where I just like don't talk as often, or it could be emotional space where
Hmm.
I'm like not, actually working on just like, why did I create this and what is this here to teach me? And I'm really not even putting that person or the name, like who they are, but more the dynamic that they're bringing into me. And it's like, okay, this is here to teach me something that is clear. And so by number three, I've given myself that space and time. And I like the power of three, even with, wooing and
Hmm.
letting a partner in that you're attracted to. It's like 3 dates, 3 long phone conversations before you judge them for how they are in bed.
Hmm.
Go for it 3 times if there's like an awesome personality dynamic. We are so quick to cut somebody off, which is also a boundary pushing in my sense too. It's like if somebody's actually, you're not able to see somebody's reasons for boundary pushing because of your own wounding,
Or
you're
humanness.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah, you're actually pulling back the healing of the planet because we all need to heal.
Yeah. You're withdrawing.
And
You're scared. Hmm.
yeah, and we don't need to be the fucking carpet that everybody walks on either. So
Hmm.
the rule of three really helps me, and it helps that the number three is about rebirth and destruction. So
Mm.
like as soon as I get that number three, I'm like, yes, no is one and two, and three is that.
Yeah,
All
I think that's a great rule. It's so funny. I'm looking on my YouTube stuff right now. It says 3 hour sound bath. Like
right.
one of the, I think that was how my relationship started. It was the rule of 3 hours. It was like, boom, okay, we're together. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think when you are discerning those red flags, I think the hardest part, even being a therapist myself and navigating a lot of trauma, past trauma, is like, and being highly intuitive, like, how do you discern intuition and a red flag from a trauma response, right? And it's like, oh, like, is this me or is this something else? And again, it goes back to some of that gaslighting stuff. I think that is really underrated, like, is and under talked about how hard that is sometimes to discern. So that rule of three, I can see can really help out with that, because it's like, okay, like I was doing great today. I already processed my trauma reaction after the first one and how it could have been me, but then it happens again and then it happens again. And you realize, okay, maybe this isn't me. And I also think that when you're healing your trauma or you're trying to, you up level and change your relationships, it is natural to be a little bit more on the chop side and cut people out. And I know before I met my love, I had spent mainly almost 2 years really not even giving anybody the time of day, really, because I just had been pushed too far. And I was like, okay, that's done. Nobody gets any access to me because I'm going to focus on my shit. Of course, that's the year that my business hit 6 figures too. It always works that way, right?
Yeah.
And then but yeah, then I could slowly start to let people in again with a very cautious, discernment process. But sometimes you have to clean the slate, I feel like, if you're trying to do that healing or to refresh an area of your life. So I think, just like anything, whatever method you're choosing, as long as you don't stay stuck in that and it's not holding you back, you can try out these different ways for a little while and grow and evolve and change. But I like the rule of three. That definitely helps with the discernment process. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's also this concept too, like in within friendship, boundary
Mhm.
pushing, right? Um, if you don't like the way somebody actually does speak to you, or a big piece, I feel like within friendship between, whether it's your girlfriends or your guy friends,
Mhm.
um, you know, again, the seeking approval, you'll see that there too, or you just like have put up with this. Why are you putting up with
Mm.
friend's behavior that you actually really doesn't work for you, but
Yeah.
they're a friend to you? So it's
Yeah.
like, I had a recent situation, it's like a friend who is too intoxicated and pushes the boundary, right?
Mm.
And it's
Mhm.
like, you don't usually act this way, but
Mhm.
you're totally acting this way now.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like the next day, it's like, oh, I was drunk. And I've been there too. Like, I've totally pushed a boundary with the friend when I had drank too much, and I actually didn't even really remember it until the next day. Her lover called me up and was just like, don't know if you realize this, but yesterday, and it was like, in my mind, the way I remembered it, I was like, that's not at all what was happening for me. But
Yeah.
I also had to admit that, like, I had been drinking, so I could have been a little bit more loose, and perhaps
Altered
I
perceptions. Yeah.
totally. And so it's
Little
like,
different half dimension.
yeah, so there's that piece too with, like, we have to remember that, like, when people are pushing their boundaries, and you got to look at, like, when is it and when does it happen too,
Mhm.
right? Because I noticed for me, I think I used to drink way more, and I was like more of a binge drinker. It's
Mhm.
funny now, it's like I drink and I'm like, what the heck? Like, it's just something's going on with my energy.
Mhm.
However, it's like, I know for me, it was because I would be so tightly wound up and being so, like, having to hold my shit together all the time, that,
Mhm.
like, I would crave something that would just release all boundaries, release
Yeah.
all control, and just the
Mhm.
desire to be free, and want that. And so there's this beauty to that too, of, like, letting people be who they are, right? And, like, opening and accepting people for who they are. However, there is always this thing of discernment. And so even with friendships, you know, having to have that conversation and just being like, I'm not okay with that.
Mhm.
And actually, you're not allowed to drink around me anymore,
Mhm.
because it seems to be a pattern that when you drink around me, this happens. Um,
Yeah. And I think there's going to be different boundaries for different people too. Like I don't think I'm listening as you're talking. I don't think there's even like a set like way you should behave in certain situations per se, but it's like how does what's okay with one person, what's not okay with another person, right?
right.
There's certain you got to read your people and you got to read your circles.
Totally, totally. And I feel like boundaries, what I'm learning now, like, as an older woman walking this planet, is I'm really starting to see that, like, the boundaries piece is actually rebuilding this relationship with myself.
For sure.
And it's, the more I'm doing that, actually can be a healing force and a healing force field.
Mhm.
Because if somebody pushes my boundaries, it's like, now that I've built the relationship with myself, I'm noticing, like, it's not a butcher knife. It's actually like, I'm able to be like, oh, that I can understand, like, oh, that's a trigger because of this, this, and this. And now I see that you're here to, like, see where I'm at with this, and let me just let you know, this is where I'm at with this now. Like, this is
Mhm.
no longer welcome in my world, and it's no longer accepted in my world. And folks and clients will always say, well, my gosh, like, if I say that, if I say that to my parents about, I don't like it when they make homophobic jokes, or I don't like it when they joke about black people, or I don't like it that they, like, twist their face when they see, I don't know, like, homosexuality, or I don't like it when they joke about, a certain race, and you're
Mhm.
drawing a boundary, right? And they're very afraid of, like, the pushback, because also this friend of mine that I said about the drinking, when I did draw the boundary, he got very violent with me.
Oh wow.
He continued to drink more than during that conversation, and it got very violent. And that's been my experience when I put a boundary out with a
Yeah.
man, and it's about sexuality or not wanting to go out on a date with them. I don't know if it's because of my physical form. I think
Mhm.
it's also because I didn't know my self-worth in those moments, and so my field was already, like, it was porous and collapsible. Whereas now it's like porous and flexible. It was like porous and collapsible, that, like, people could just come in, and I would most usually get a very physical, violent response, like, well, fuck you then, bitch. Like, well, you
Mhm.
think you're fucking hot? Well, you're not. You just, like, you're this anyway. Oh, well, you're this and you're that. And it's like, okay, cool. That's fine. So what I'm saying here is, like, building this relationship, and I'm learning that speaking your truth is
Mhm.
kind of the best way to go, because you speak your truth and somebody leaves your life, or your parents don't want to deal with you. Well, you already knew you didn't want to deal with that dynamic anyway. That's why you spoke up in the first place. So it's
Mhm.
like, cool, good on me. I don't got to deal with that shit no more.
Mhm.
And or they listen to you and shift
Mhm.
to your truth.
Mhm.
So why not always speak your truth?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I totally resonate with that. And I realized as a young woman, I realized the pattern when I started watching a lot of HGTV, and I would be attracted to like these fixer upper shows. and then I go like house hunting to like rent a new place, and I would see the potential. I'd be like, oh, I could do this and this and this, but then the turnkey house, I'd be like, oh, what, it's nice, but like there's no challenge there, or but then I realized, man, I do that with people too, which is great for my profession, but not so good when you're choosing your friend group or the people that need to be like healthy and that you're sticking with, because those are the people that are going to, when you're working with folks to heal certain things, you're getting paid. Your energy gets drained, but you're getting compensated with money.
Right.
When you're out in your social groups, there needs to be a back and forth flow so that you're feeling
Right.
filled
Right.
up and
Right.
rejuvenated. You can't have people draining your energy, because that is going to affect your money. It is, you're talking about root chakra. It's going to affect
Totally.
your sleep. It's going to affect your romantic relations. It's going to affect your sex drive. It's going to affect all of your whole energy system, like you said, adrenal fatigue. And this is why when you're with a narcissist, so many people with narcissists, they're going to have thyroid issues and adrenal fatigue issues, because it's literally their life force energy is being depleted so far that their organs are being impacted, and you don't even know, because a lot of times what they're doing is they're like you said, the spiritual gurus, it's like they do so many good things. Like they walk into a room, they're like beautiful, and they're the life of the party, and they're talented and creative, and everybody's like, wow, they're such a bright light. But they're only like that for a short amount of time, and they're borrowing it from all these other people who are willing to like do whatever they can to be around them, thinking, being fooled by this exterior. And because they have all these great qualities, you keep forgiving like those little violations, right? The gaslighting, the little things like that. And so yeah, I mean, we end up all of a sudden we're totally depleted before we even know what hit us. And
Right.
it can happen. I see it can happen to anyone. I don't think anybody's immune. When I was a young therapist, they used to say nobody's immune from domestic violence, and I stupidly thought to myself, like, I'm immune. Like, I'm not going to let anybody push me around. I'm not going to let anybody do anything like that to me. Fast forward so many years, I'm married to a narcissist. It's just like, how does it happen? It doesn't start that way.
Yeah.
And
It's
then the other thing too I wanted to bring up is like, even like tantra or like unity consciousness or whatever you want to talk, however you want to talk about it. It's like we have this urge to merge, right? We have this urge of oneness, and then it's also very sexy in movies and very romantic to be one. And even marriage, in the ceremony and the wedding bands, and your prince comes and he like saves you, and all the movies, it's like you're saving the damsel in distress, all these Hollywood ideas. And that may be very romantic for a movie or romantic for a date or whatever, but in the long run, it's not romantic at all, because what's attractive is having that separation and having your own individual self. So what you're saying about speaking your truth, you need to do that. Like, it's good to be accommodating and to get along and be, easy to be with, be a person who's easy to be with. But when something really matters to you, you have to speak out, because that's actually what creates attraction
right.
in the
Right.
other, because it's a little bit of friction, it's a little bit of difference, it's a little bit of separateness, and it's
Right.
finding the right balance of that separateness and that togetherness.
Yes. And
As
I
we,
think the mode of how we speak about it in tribe, in community, I mean, I think that's a big piece of the work that we are so committed to, is like, what is the communication that's happening when you realize that your boundary has been pushed, and how can you own that, like, okay, my boundary being pushed is my shit because I'm reacting to it, it's something that is occurring for me,
mm-hmm,
and I need to like vent this out to you, and let you know like what my wound is speaking,
mm-hmm,
and then I would like it to be received by you, and
mm-hmm,
I want to be appreciated for speaking my truth.
mm-hmm,
That's so huge. Like, please let me know that like it's safe for me to speak my truth. And then
mm-hmm,
once that for I feel like that for the feminine energy in all of us, that's the big piece of this tantric work of healing the feminine energy on the planet, is like creating safe spaces to speak our truth. And a safe space can be so cliche. It doesn't mean that everybody's shutting up, but no, you're actively listening, because guess what this person might say might actually trigger vent in you, and then it's gonna we're all gonna listen to you, and we're gonna let you vent this out. And so being acknowledged for sharing your truth, and
mm-hmm,
then at the same time, once you're acknowledged for sharing your truth, that creates a space for healing where the person can get clear and be like, you know what? I actually really don't enjoy that because I have dated 3 narcissists in this lifetime. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm noticing that when you touch my arm without consent, it's like you're the center of attention here. And like I have to be okay with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you drink and you freaking go off on me,
Mm-hmm.
like, and it becomes violent, where,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there were moments where I did have marks on my body, right? And when that happens, um, that actually is reminding me of, a dynamic in my family where I had to deal with it no matter what, even if it was hurting me, and that I
Yeah.
have to accept it because you're my elder and I have to respect you.
Mm-hmm.
This was a teacher of mine. So it's like I have to respect you as my teacher. And so, I got to let it go down whatever way that it goes down. And it's like, that's actually, that has to be owned by me, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, this is why I've let it go down. Like, so I'm actually grateful for you for triggering me, because now I can see that this shit is ultimately linked
Mm-hmm.
to my repression of a wound that still needs healing. I would love for you to be a part of this healing process with me.
I would love to. Yeah.
I would love to
My
be
honor.
able to say that, and believe it or not, before you know it, it's like, oh shit.
Mm-hmm.
Now when you've taken the ownership that, like,
Mm-hmm.
though I feel that you crossed a boundary for me. That boundary ultimately was created
Mm-hmm.
because I'm an open being of love and light. I
Yeah.
am infinite
Yeah.
consciousness restricted to this physical form.
Mm-hmm.
So we ultimately are one. You are a reflection of me. There is no other. We are actually one, reflecting a deeper wound here. Maybe not even you. Maybe divine sent you here to help me see
Yeah.
what's really going on. That, like,
Yeah.
is it dynamic on the planet, or is it dynamic of the ancestry or the patriarchy? Get
Mm-hmm.
clear on that. And then the other person is like, oh shit, like, thank you for that ownership. And then they'll probably reflect, like, wow, why am I a boundary pusher? Why
Mm-hmm.
do I feel like I need to cross a boundary to
Mm-hmm.
get that attention and love from you?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I have to use alcohol to,
Yeah.
like, express myself with you and, like, force you to do anything? What's the root of alcoholism? Why do I feel that even if you're at my house that I can touch your arm without asking?
Well, I love what you say too, the invitation of like, I would love for you to be this healing partner, because it is an invitation. It's saying it's coming closer. It's like, I would love for you to be in this with me, because sometimes when you set a boundary with someone, they feel
Yeah.
rejected, or it triggers their wounds, and then now you're like triggering off of each other. But when you say it that way, I would love for you to help me with this. It's like, okay, we're on the same team against this other issue, so let's tease it out. And I know even just a couple days ago, Rich and I got into a disagreement, which we often do about certain things. So
Yay.
yeah, I mean, it's fine, but I think you mentioned it in another show, like when you have that safety or that connectedness or that commitment, and you know that neither one of you is going to leave, that you're going to stick it out, like you have the safety to work through some of these deep triggers that you don't even know are there, and all of a sudden it comes up, and it's like, okay, this is coming up for me because of this past. And they're like, and then the other one's like, well, I don't want to be compared to your ex or whatever else. And then this is what's coming up for me. And then, we can look at, like you said, at the patriarchy, at cultural stuff, at like racism. We can look at all these different factors, but we're discussing it almost like theories, like we don't know what's happening right now. We just know that this is weird and we are not like seeing eye to eye. And then each conversation, it kind of gets, you get to a deeper understanding of what's happening, because again, you're noticing patterns or whatnot. But then I also wanted to mention that, like, there's been nights we've gone to bed and we are not resolved. We have not figured it out yet. But we always come together, and it's the physical touch. It's the physical touch, just like still being willing to come together and give a hug, or just a hand on the thigh or whatever. In those moments, of course, you still have to ask consent, especially when somebody's feeling kind of prickly emotionally or whatever. And then the other part of that too is, even in committed relationships, you still can't just go like grabbing your partner's genitals and things like
No.
that. I mean, you can, but as long as you have prior consent that
Right.
that sort of thing is
Right.
okay.
Right.
But it's just, it's still, there's a whole process happening for each person, and certain touches, certain actions, certain behaviors are all going to mean something else. And is it a trauma coming up? Is it somebody else's trauma? Is it their behavior that needs, you just, it's like you can be scientists together and figure it out. And it can be done. The work can be done. And each time we spend the time to dive deep like this, we come out even closer and even stronger together, and the relationship goes deeper. So that is the beauty on the other side of this. Not only do you get to hold on to yourself, heal yourself, know who you are, retain your energy, but you also get to deepen your
Mm,
relationships, even
yeah.
if you don't agree. Like even today, we were talking about it again, like now that things have cooled down more, we're talking about, oh, I felt this way. Oh, I felt this way. And we could speak about it more objectively. Is it fully resolved? No, like it,
Mhm.
it's not like we don't have that 100% understanding, but you still kind of, you still work on it bit by bit to see what's really going on here, to untangle. So I like the invitation to work on
Yeah.
that, to do that.
Well, and I think that, the invitation also allows us to heal the collective.
For sure, for
Because
sure.
we always want to work to build cohesion instead of separation. There's so much, it's so easy to other and just,
Mm-hmm.
that's a very big avoidant thing for me. So it's like, oh, let's see if we can do the work if it's available. If not, that's okay too.
Yeah, and not to mention that every now that you've gotten this awareness with whoever you're in this conversation with of the boundaries, or whether for us was it boundaries? It wasn't boundaries. The conversation wasn't boundaries. It was something else, but it was like using the boundaries within the
Right.
discussion. Um, but you know, you get to you get to be get to hear reflections of your behavior in yourself from someone that you feel safe enough to be reflective with. Because if you're feeling not safe with somebody, you're going to be like, no, 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 like that's not me. And you're going to push it off. But if somebody can be loving, like you were saying, and have that unconditional loving presence, then it's like, okay, maybe I can be flawed in this person's energy. Maybe I can fall apart. Maybe I
Mm.
can reflect on what's wrong. And then you're going to be reflective of that with every interaction and every person. So it's just like spreading. Yeah, absolutely. Spreading across the planet. And now that we're having this conversation, I've been feeling kind of I guess it's just burnout, like COVID burnout, I'm just like, okay, can we be done with this now? Like, and it's not even the virus. It's so much bigger than that, as you know, all of the ramifications. It's just like, and I know we're just starting some
Uh,
of the stuff, but it just
Talk
feels like,
about boundary pushing though. It's
oh
like, what?
gosh,
You're gonna invade on my ability to travel? What? You're gonna like
yeah.
invade on my ability to like go and do things that I choose to do? Like, see, for
Mhm.
me, the ultimate boundary pusher is when you fucking push your boundary on my sovereignty.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
my birthright.
interestingly enough, I don't want to
I know,
take
veer
this
off.
this episode too much. Not that we have like millions of viewers, but um, but I we could one day. But I was just watching actually Dr. Chris Northrup talk about yesterday on Instagram. She was saying that in the I think 95% of people are vaccinated now. I think I read that, and I was a little surprised that it'd be that much, but that's usually typically what mandated vaccines are, is about 95% for like the kids. Um, but they were saying that there's the antibody, I think it's an antibody to the spike protein that's created, is causing has like 8 different allergens to people's systems. So some people are going to be more sensitive than others, but what's happening is it's disrupting women's hormones,
Mm.
and it's causing blood clots. And I know some people are having strokes and whatnot, but some women are having very heavy periods, and their menstrual cycles are changing because of this. But not only that, but the spike protein is secreted in pheromones. And so you know how women, their periods sync up when they spend a lot of time together, like if you have your office mates or whatever else, it's because of the pheromones. And they're saying that this antibody is secreted in the pheromones and the sweat of a vaccinated person. So you could be unvaccinated and still get this allergen that can disrupt your hormones. It's very interesting. So when we talk about boundaries, it's like you can be um, try to be as safe as you can, and not, you know, have your sovereignty, as you're saying, like, I want to be vaccinated, I don't want to be vaccinated, whatever your choice is. If that's what in your heart you feel is going to be the healthiest for you, that's the way it should be, right? But then we see how this can affect other people in different ways, because not all of us are built the same, and we're going to have different sensitivities, and we're going to have different reactions to different things. And the whole fact that it is experimental is the biggest, you know, question mark out there. So it really has to stay voluntary, and it really has to, you know, we have to fight for that human sovereignty too. But
Yeah.
that was just an interesting side
Well, I
note.
feel like the health industry, that would be a whole nother show, because
Mm,
you know mental health, you know, I know the educational system like very well, but like even just like the health industry is definitely a boundary pusher.
mm,
And sometimes people feel really pressured to do things with their bodies
mm-hmm,
that don't feel in alignment, and they're not following their gut, and they're not
mm-hmm.
trusting their gut, but they're trusting a system that might not have their health as the highest interest, but the capitalistic economy as the highest.
Right. I mean, that's actually when I fully departed, not fully, but mostly departed from mainstream medical system, is when I was pregnant with my son, Jax, who's 10 now, same one who likes to watch action movies. He's a healthy dude though. And I was pregnant with him during the swine flu epidemic. And so they had just rolled out, again, experimental vaccine, because everybody's in a panic about the swine flu. And the nurse practitioner told me, you have to get this, like, you're pregnant, you have to get it. And I was like, I don't even use Tylenol, like, I'm or nail polish or anything, like, during my pregnancy. Like, this is just seems wacky to do something experimental. And so, and my intuition was like screaming at me, no. And but she put fear into me, and she was like bullying me with fear. And I was like, I do not feel safe with that kind of
Mm.
person delivering my child. I need to get out of here. And that's when I ended up doing a home birth. I hired, like, at the last 5 weeks, I only had 5 weeks left to go. And I hired a home birth, like, licensed midwife to come and help me birth him at home, which I did. And, you know,
That's great.
everything went great. But that's what it was. It was a boundary violation. She was not giving me informed consent. She was pushing me. She wasn't making it seem like a thing. She said 1 in 3 women with the swine flu die. As it turns out, the vaccine maimed more people than the virus did. You know, that's, we know that now. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. I just looked at the time. Can you believe it's 8:16?
Ah,
How does that happen? See, because
I
time
know.
does not
I
exist.
know, it's getting worse and worse. It's for someone like me who time never really existed. It's just, I don't know whether to be like happy or scared. Like the world is changing in weird ways. Yeah, I was sure today was 420, and I was like, oh no, it's only 419. Yeah, some people celebrate days.
Yeah, that's
Anyway, yeah, well, it was lovely, great conversation as usual. I think we covered everything we set out to cover, which is,
good, which is
and
pretty
more.
awesome. We're getting better and better at this.
Yeah, we are getting more concise. We've had some 2 hour shows before.
So when our million viewers hits, it's gonna
Yeah,
just be like butter. We just gonna
yeah,
be
yeah.
like,
So exactly. So people that are still there, people are watching this, share, subscribe, meet us back here. We're back. Kirti and I, in particular, are back here every 2 weeks, but I'm here every Monday, and I bring in new guests all the time, so we can bring in new topics and new perspectives. So yeah, come on back, and you can find Kirti and I both at our websites. We both do one-on-one sessions, group work, all kinds of cool stuff. So if what we're saying resonates with you, come find us. Find us in the interwebs.
yes.
All right. Thank you so
Ciao.
much, sister. Love you. I don't know how to close the screen. That's going to be interesting. All right. We'll see you next time.
All right, bye, love.